Cuba went into despair because Trump is returning with a maximum pressure strategy. And the communist regime responded the way cornered regimes usually do, trying to turn fear into a military threat against the United States. On this Monday, May 18, 2026, the crisis intensified with the information that Havana reportedly had more than 300 military drones and was reportedly discussing the use of these weapons against the American base in Guantanamo, against United States ships, and even against Key West in Florida. There has not been an attack yet and no deaths have been reported so far, but the warning is serious. Cuba knows it has lost strength, knows its old military machine is rusty, and knows it can't face Washington on equal terms. And that's why it tries to copy the playbook of Russia and Iran, betting on long-range drones to scare the White House. Trump sees this as a direct provocation in America's backyard, and the political assessment is stark. Havana is not just defending itself, it's activating weapons to try to prevent the new American offensive from advancing against the Cuban dictatorship. I'll explain everything soon, but subscribe to the channel to stay informed. Real-time information with the best journalistic quality ever seen. Milson Alves, the standard of credibility. Trump doesn't need to land in Havana to make the Cuban regime tremble. He came at the regime through the CIA, the Department of Justice, economic pressure, and a clear warning that Cuba cannot become a platform for Russia, Iran, and China, just a few kilometers from Florida. The CIA director John Ratcliffe was in Cuba on Thursday. According to Axios, he warned local authorities against hostilities. The phrase, attributed to a CIA official, shows the weight of the message. The Western Hemisphere cannot become a playground for the adversaries of the United States. What Cuba is reportedly doing, according to the information released, is simple and dangerous, deploying attack drones with different capabilities at strategic points on the island. The accusation is that this equipment has come from Russia and Iran since 2023, while Cuban authorities have reportedly sought more drones and Russian military material in the past month. The goal would be to create a response capability against Washington not through conventional force, but through asymmetric threats using drones as a tool of intimidation. The choice of drones also reveals weakness. Cuba does not appear as a modern military power. The report itself, cited by Cuban authorities, points out that no one in Washington would be concerned about Cuban fighter jets because it's not even clear if Cuba has any fighters in flying condition. That's why the regime tries to compensate for its military failure with a cheap, mobile, and hard-to-track weapon. It's the logic of a cornered government. When it can't face its opponent on equal terms, it tries to create risk, fear, and political cost for its adversary. The Guantanamo base becomes the center of the crisis because it is located inside Cuba and represents the most sensitive American military presence on the island. If the Cuban regime really discussed an attack on Guantanamo, as Axios says, the White House can't treat this as just an empty threat. Guantanamo is not a distant symbol. It is an active US military installation with political, strategic, and psychological value. An attack there would be seen in Washington as a direct act of aggression. Key West was also mentioned because it's close to Havana. The short distance changes everything. Long-range drones don't need to cross oceans or penetrate deep defenses for hours. They would take off from an island that's right next to American territory. That's why Trump's reaction is likely to be tough. It's not just about Cuba speaking out against Washington, but about a hostile regime trying to place offensive capabilities close to the American population and US military forces. Havana responded by accusing Washington of fabricating a fraudulent case to justify sanctions and possible military intervention. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez said that Cuba does not threaten nor desire war and stated that the island is preparing to face external aggression in legitimate self-defense. But the response did not address the main point. According to Reuters, Rodriguez did not explicitly mention the allegations about drones. This gap keeps the pressure on. The White House sees Cuba as a piece on a larger chessboard. The warning doesn't involve just Havana. The report cited by Axios mentions Iranian military advisors in the Cuban capital, Russian and Chinese intelligence facilities for signal collection, and Cuban interest in learning how Iran resisted American military pressure. The political interpretation in Washington is serious. Cuba would be trying to become a small forward base for the enemies of the United States in the Caribbean. The Iranian presence changes the tone of the crisis because drones have become one of the most used weapons in recent conflicts. Iran has shown how relatively inexpensive equipment can hit bases, ships, airports, and infrastructure. If Cuba tries to copy this logic, the regime is not just buying weapons, it's buying a method. It's studying a way to hurt the United States without needing a modern air force. The most explosive detail is that American authorities aren't saying a Cuban attack is imminent. That matters. Washington isn't announcing that Havana will attack tomorrow. What we're seeing is a military discussion about plans in case relations deteriorate. But for Trump, waiting for the threat to turn into an attack would mean handing the initiative to the Cuban regime. His political doctrine has always been to apply pressure before the problem grows. The Department of Justice is also preparing another tough move, an indictment against Raul Castro for the downing of 2 planes from the humanitarian group Brothers to the Rescue in 1996. Reuters reported that sources from the Department of Justice said they intended to move forward with this indictment, and Axios pointed out that it could be filed this week. This puts the old Cuban leadership back in Washington's direct crosshairs. This legal point is not a minor detail. It shows that Trump is tightening the net from several directions at the same time. On the side, intelligence points to drones and connections with external adversaries. On another front, the Department of Justice is targeting the historical responsibility of the Castro elite. In the meantime, sanctions may increase. The combination is clear. Cuba is not just facing bad news, it's facing a full political offensive. The crisis also exposes the real fear of the Cuban regime. Havana has seen the fall of its allies, has seen Washington get tougher on hostile governments, and has realized that the era of regional impunity has gotten shorter. That's why it tries to appear dangerous. The problem is that appearing dangerous near Florida might be exactly the mistake that gives Trump the argument he needed to tighten things even more. And that's exactly when the tension rises. If the drones are spread across the island, the United States' response could come before any explosion. It could come through sanctions, financial blockade, intelligence operations, military reinforcement in Guantanamo, or public pressure against the Cuban leadership. If the White House confirms new intelligence data, the pressure could move from rhetoric to concrete measures. Guantanamo is expected to be more closely monitored. American ships in the area may receive more attention, and Key West comes onto the political radar due to its proximity to Havana. Trump now has a strong narrative. Cuba is not just a failed dictatorship in the Caribbean. It is a possible armed base of United States adversaries right at Florida's doorstep. I'm Milson Alves, global internationalist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed and bring you the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves global community.